risk of Iran-Israel conflict reigniting as early as next week? Hormuz, the control game and Iran's dark fleet. China, internal pressure, and the information front. Trump-sized summit, a power stage amid global crisis. Israel is preparing for a scenario in which tensions with Iran could escalate again as early as next week, as signals from Washington suggest a major decision point is approaching. In response, Tehran has placed its entire security apparatus on high alert, reflecting rising instability across the region. According to Channel 12, Donald Trump is being directly briefed at the White House by Brad Cooper, commander of United States Central Command, on potential military options. Continuous high-level consultations indicate that Washington is moving closer to a decisive turning point. One scenario under consideration is the early breakdown of U.S.-Iran negotiations, potentially forcing Washington to shift into a more aggressive pressure phase. Regional sources suggest the U.S. could expand its current operations in the Strait of Hormuz, including possible strikes targeting Iran's energy facilities, gas infrastructure, and key government assets. The U.S. Secretary of Defense has also acknowledged that Iran has suffered significant losses over the past year, weakening its national capacity across multiple domains. However, Washington's objective goes beyond short-term pressure. The broader goal is to ensure Iran can no longer pose a long-term strategic threat to Israel, the United States, and its allies. Close coordination between the White House and the government of Benjamin Netanyahu suggests this is no longer a reactive response, but part of a more systematic approach. The real question now is no longer capability but choice, whether to escalate militarily or sustain pressure just below the threshold of war. Hormuz, the control game and Iran's dark fleet. As military pressure builds, the Strait of Hormuz remains the central arena of the strategic contest between Iran and the United States. Tehran fully understands the strategic value of Hormuz. Financial estimates suggest that if it were to fully control this route, Iran could generate between $70 and $90 billion annually through transit fees. In the past, Tehran even proposed charging roughly $2 million per vessel, with an average flow of 100 to 130 ships per day, enough to turn Hormuz into a powerful economic lever. However, proposals to share control of the strait with Gulf states were rejected. The issue was not just cost, but geopolitics. Regional countries are unwilling to indirectly grant Iran control over one of the world's most critical maritime routes, thereby weakening their strategic alignment with Washington. Instead of halting exports, Tehran is shifting to a familiar but increasingly sophisticated tactic, what can be described as maritime digital stealth. According to data from Windward AI, at least 10 sanctioned oil tankers have manipulated AIS signals to appear anchored at Basra port in Iraq, while in reality moving to Iranian ports for loading. These vessels then re-enter the system with legitimate tracking profiles, effectively disguising Iranian oil as Iraqi origin shipments. Notably, 4 of these are very large crude carriers, VLCCs, each capable of transporting around 2 million barrels, bringing the total to approximately 8 million barrels, equivalent to roughly $800 million at current prices. Beyond that, clusters of signal-silent dark fleet vessels have been detected near Chabahar port with a combined capacity of 7 to 8 million barrels. This suggests Iran is using tankers as floating storage to delay the immediate impact of the blockade. However, the effectiveness of this strategy is limited. U.S. pressure is clearly taking hold. Iran's oil exports have dropped sharply, while available storage capacity is rapidly being exhausted. If this situation continues for several more weeks, Tehran may be forced to shut down some oil wells, a move that could inflict long-term damage on its energy sector. This leads to a paradox. Iran continues to generate revenue but remains unable to break the blockade. Trump prioritizes strategy over war. Despite having military options ready, current signals suggest that Donald Trump is still avoiding a full-scale war with Iran. Instead, Washington continues to pursue a maximum pressure strategy through economic blockade and maritime control. Trump has stated that Iran wants a deal while maintaining a firm position that Tehran must never be allowed to possess nuclear weapons. Behind these statements, however, lies a more calculated approach. Apply enough pressure to force concessions without crossing into direct conflict. Domestic political factors play a significant role. Rising energy prices are placing pressure on American voters, particularly as midterm elections approach. A new war in the Middle East would increase both financial costs and political risks for the White House. Meanwhile, Iran is pursuing a strategy of endurance, betting that it can outlast the pressure longer than the American public is willing to tolerate a prolonged confrontation. What we're seeing now is a clear strategic standoff. The United States tightens pressure to force Iran to back down, while Iran prolongs the situation, waiting for Washington to lose momentum. At this point, Trump's choice is becoming clear: to continue the blockade and sustained pressure rather than initiate a full-scale war. Military risk: why the US cannot strike fast against Iran. If Washington chooses to escalate militarily, the challenge is not the ability to strike, it is the ability to control the consequences. Iran's key assets, such as the Strait of Hormuz, coastal bases, and energy infrastructure, are areas Tehran has spent years preparing to defend. Unlike limited strike operations, any large-scale campaign would force US forces into what are effectively pre-mapped kill zones, where the adversary understands the terrain and can organize ambushes. In such a scenario, US naval assets operating in the Persian Gulf would become direct targets for Iran's anti-ship missile systems and drone networks. Even a small number of successful penetrations could inflict enough damage on vessels or shipping lanes to undermine the core strategic objective, ensuring freedom of navigation through Hormuz. However, the most significant threat in Hormuz does not lie above the surface. The area has effectively turned into a subsurface battlefield, where the real risks come from naval mines and torpedoes, low-cost weapons with strategic-level impact. At just 33 kilometers wide, Hormuz allows Iran to deploy a dense mine matrix, turning every shipping lane into a high-risk corridor. Modern mines are equipped with magnetic, pressure, and acoustic sensors capable of identifying high-value targets such as warships or oil tankers. Combined with mini-submarines and high-speed torpedoes, Iran does not need to achieve direct hits. Simply creating the perception of mine presence is enough to disrupt maritime traffic and trigger volatility in global energy markets. This is the logic of asymmetric warfare: low cost but disproportionately large strategic effects. Hormuz undermines why US naval forces still maintain dominance. Rather than relying solely on firepower, Washington employs a layered mine countermeasure system. Avenger-class mine countermeasures ships use sonar to map the seabed, while unmanned underwater vehicles, UUVs, are deployed to neutralize mines remotely. MH-60S Seahawk helicopters provide aerial detection, while acoustic decoy systems are used to confuse incoming torpedoes. Virginia-class submarines serve as a key deterrent. With high stealth and precision-guided weaponry, they enable the US to monitor and control the battlespace without revealing their presence. The result is a unique balance. Iran can make Hormuz dangerous, but the United States can still keep it open. And it does not stop there. A large-scale deployment could draw the US into a prolonged presence lasting weeks, even months. This creates an opportunity for Iran to shift from defense to counter-offensive, turning what was intended as a rapid strike into a war of attrition. One of the most complex scenarios involves striking nuclear facilities such as those in Isfahan. These targets require significant force, specialized equipment, and extended operational timelines, yet still offer no guarantee of complete success. For this reason, many U.S. military leaders, including senior commanders, are believed to oppose high-risk escalation. Instead, alternative options are being considered: standoff strikes, controlled air campaigns, or limited-duration operations rather than long-term occupation. All of these factors point to a clear conclusion: a war with Iran would not be short. It would be a high-stakes gamble with unpredictable escalation. And that is precisely why, up to this point, Washington has chosen to remain at the threshold of war rather than cross it. However, strategic pressure is no longer confined to the Middle East. It is now expanding into another front: China, internal pressure, and the information front. While the Middle East is being stretched by the US-Iran confrontation, another front is quietly taking shape in the background: China, simultaneously a strategic competitor to the United States and a system facing increasingly visible internal pressure. At the center of attention is the investigation into Zhang Youxia, vice chairman of China's Central Military Commission. According to multiple sources, the probe has lasted more than 3 months and is now entering its final phase, with a high likelihood of concluding within the next 2 months around July. The allegations include abuse of power, bribery, and interference in personnel appointments for personal gain. However, what stands out is how Beijing is handling the case. Rather than disclosing details, information is being tightly controlled, with a strong possibility that only technical economic charges will be made public, avoiding emphasis on internal power struggles. Within China's political system, the handling of senior military figures directly reflects the stability of the power structure. The prolonged investigation, strict information control, and delayed disclosure point to a high level of caution, while also suggesting potential internal disagreements over how the case should be resolved. At the same time, another front, less visible but equally significant, is facing mounting pressure: information control. According to the 2026 World Press Freedom Index, published by Reporters Without Borders, China ranks 178 out of 180, near the bottom globally. Notably, the country is currently detaining 121 journalists, the highest number in the world. The report highlights an increasingly sophisticated toolkit of control, from digital surveillance and legal pressure to the use of national security laws for prosecution. Beyond domestic borders, this model is also believed to be expanding outward through legal frameworks and political influence. In Hong Kong, the situation shows a similar trajectory. While rankings have not shifted significantly, the overall score continues to decline, reflecting a sustained tightening of the media environment. The sentencing of media tycoon Jimmy Lai to 20 years in prison stands as a clear example of this shift. Together, these developments point to a complex balancing act inside China, competing strategically with the United States on the global stage while tightly controlling its domestic system to prevent instability. Against that backdrop, proposals to raise the U.S. defense budget to as much as $1.5 trillion are not aimed solely at Iran, but at a broader confrontation framework, one in which China plays a central role. This places Beijing in a difficult position. It cannot slow external competition, yet it also cannot afford to show any signs of internal instability. And within that tension, a major diplomatic event is now being prepared, one that could become the next test of the balance of power between the two superpowers. Trump-Xi Summit, a power stage amid global crisis. In the broader picture, the meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping should not be viewed as an isolated diplomatic event. It is taking place at a time when Washington is managing multiple fronts simultaneously. The blockade of Iran at the Strait of Hormuz, global energy pressure, a record defense budget, and strategic competition with China. As such, this summit is effectively a test whether the United States still has the capacity to manage multiple crises at once. For Beijing, this is not simply a meeting to stabilize relations. China will be closely watching how Trump approaches the negotiating table. If Washington becomes entangled in the Middle East, if oil prices surge, or if U.S. forces are stretched toward Iran, Beijing may interpret this as a sign of strategic overextension. Conversely, if the U.S. can sustain pressure on Iran while maintaining the initiative against China, the message will be clear: Washington is still capable of managing multiple fronts at once. That is why preparations for the summit are being controlled down to the smallest detail. At a deeper level, U.S.-China relations are no longer built on strategic trust. Dialogue continues, but under conditions of mutual suspicion. The need to account for scenarios such as surveillance, signal interference, information leaks, protection of nuclear command chains, and even non-traditional security risks underscores a critical point. This is no longer a cooperative summit, but an engagement between two power systems that fundamentally distrust one another. For Trump, the summit is an opportunity to demonstrate that the United States still holds a central role in the global order. After using blockade measures to pressure Iran, Washington must show that it is not merely reacting to crises, but shaping the strategic landscape if the meeting unfolds with the U.S. In a position of initiative, it would reinforce the message that Washington remains in control across both the Middle East and the Indo-Pacific. For Xi, the objective is different. Beijing must avoid the image of being outmaneuvered while also demonstrating that China remains a peer power despite internal military uncertainty, economic pressure, and a tightening information environment. A carefully staged summit would allow China to project an image of stability, control, and long-term strategic resilience. As a result, the Trump-Xi meeting may function less as a negotiation and more as a strategic test of strength. Even without major breakthroughs, the way both sides appear, speak, and manage the atmosphere of the summit will be enough to send powerful strategic signals. If tensions in the Middle East continue to escalate, the summit could be delayed or adjusted. But if it proceeds as planned, it would signal that Washington intends to show the Iran crisis is not sufficient to divert U.S. focus away from China. This is a critical point. In America's long-term strategy, Iran is an urgent hotspot, but China remains the central competitor. Taken as a whole, from the Middle East to Beijing, the challenge facing the United States is no longer about managing individual crises. It is about maintaining strategic advantage within a system stretched across multiple fronts. Iran is testing America's endurance in the Middle East. China is testing America's ability to coordinate at the global level. And the Trump-Xi summit is where the world watches who actually controls the pace of this game. This is not just a diplomatic signal, it is a direct test of a new power order. Whether the United States still holds the initiative or whether China has found an opening to challenge Washington's leadership. If escalation unfolds, where do you think the next flashpoint will be, Hormuz or another front? Drop your prediction in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next major update